Usually when we talk about the geography of the future, there's this expectation of predictability, right? Like a map you've already completely memorized.
Yeah, absolutely. We default to the established map. We just assume the centers of power will remain, perfectly visible, categorized exactly where the previous generation left them.
Exactly. You think of the future of technology, and your brain immediately paints a picture of, I don't know, palm trees, sleek glass campuses, the perpetual sunshine of Silicon Valley. You just point at the California coast and say, well, there it is.
Right. Or maybe Austin, Texas now, or Seattle. But it's
Yeah.
always these very familiar, predictable hubs.
Yeah. But you step into the world of artificial intelligence and massive global energy demands and sovereign wealth, and that old map is completely useless. The entire geopolitical landscape is shifting.
It really is. The energy requirements alone are forcing that shift.
Right, which leads us to a premise that really forces you to rethink everything about where the next century of wealth will be generated. What if, what if the absolute epicenter of the next economic revolution, the physical heart of the global AI industry, isn't located in a sleek corporate park in California?
Or even in a booming Texas metropolis, right?
Exactly. What if the key to the future is actually located in the highest, coldest peaks of the Himalayas?
It's a wild concept. And, we are pulling this directly from a fascinating multilingual manifesto, or really a blog post published on May 28, 2026.
Yeah, and this was written by a Nepali expat and tech entrepreneur named Paramendra Kumar Bhagat, right?
That's right. The document is titled Democracy for Nepal, Himalayan Compute, the Vehicle for Nepal's Economic Revolution. And it basically operates as a master plan to turn the nation of Nepal into the global capital of AI compute.
And the document is just sweeping in its scope. I mean, we are looking at a roadmap that intertwines raw hydroelectric power, massive geopolitical maneuvering, highly unconventional grassroots funding strategies, and honestly, the multi-continental political history of the founder himself.
It's definitely not your standard Silicon Valley pitch deck. It reads much more like a visionary moonshot thesis.
Yeah, totally. So the goal here for you, the listener, is to meticulously unpack the mechanics of this proposal with us. Because while the claims are audacious and the political references are vast, our job today is to just impartially explore the underlying economics and the physical logistics of this, well, nation-altering moonshot.
Right. We're just looking at the blueprint he laid out. And to understand the audacity of the claims made here, we really have to start with the foundational equation of the entire manifesto.
The thing he calls Himalayan Compute.
Exactly. Himalayan Compute. And it begins with an astronomical physical asset, which is Nepal's massive 50,000 megawatt hydroelectric potential.
50,000 megawatts. I mean, let's put that into perspective for a second. That is 50 gigawatts of raw continuous power. That is roughly equivalent to the peak electricity demand of a medium-sized industrialized European nation.
Yeah, it's a staggering amount of energy.
And it's entirely generated by the gravitational force of river systems flowing down from the highest mountain range on Earth. Now, the traditional economic model for Nepal has always been to build dams, generate this electricity, and then, basically sell it across the border to India.
Right. That's been the standard playbook. But Bhagat is proposing a radical pivot away from that model. He doesn't want to export the power at all.
So what's the plan?
He wants to take 80% of that massive 50,000 megawatt capacity and push it directly through massive arrays of NVIDIA GPU chips.
Oh, wow. Okay, so instead of exporting the electricity, you use it domestically to power servers.
Exactly. Because when you push electricity through those specific silicon architectures, you generate compute, which is the raw processing power that trains and operates artificial intelligence.
And compute is arguably the most valuable, highest demand commodity in the global economy right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Every single time you ask an AI to write code or generate a complex image or, sequence a novel protein, you are consuming compute.
Right, or even optimizing a supply chain. The demand is practically bottomless at this point.
It is. But the physical reality of generating that compute brings us to a massive bottleneck in the current AI landscape. And this is something the founder identifies through what he calls geographical arbitrage.
Okay, geographical arbitrage. Unpack that for us.
So the manifesto provides a perfect real-world contrast. The founder notes that he's actually writing this document while in West Texas.
Okay.
And he's observing these massive AI data centers being built by companies like OpenAI in places like Abilene.
Right, because Texas has been huge for data centers lately.
Exactly. And the logic for building in Texas is straightforward, right? Land is incredibly cheap. and you need vast physical footprints for these data center warehouses.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. The Texas model contains a critical thermodynamic flaw.
And that would be the heat.
The heat, yes. When you pack tens of thousands of cutting-edge GPUs into a room and run them at maximum capacity, I mean, they generate an unbelievable amount of thermal energy.
Yeah, they're basically giant heaters.
Exactly. And if you do not actively cool those chips, the silicon will literally melt down. So the founder highlights this staggering statistic. 25% of the electricity used in these Texas data centers goes solely toward cooling the facilities.
Wait, 25%?
Yep. 1/4 of the power.
That is insane. So you are buying massive amounts of electricity on the Texas grid, and a quarter of your operational budget just vanishes into thin air just to run industrial air conditioners to fight the Texas summer.
It's an incredibly inefficient loop, right? You are basically using energy to fight the climate you chose to build in.
Right, right.
And this is where the Nepal advantage, as he puts it, crystallizes. Bhagat argues that Nepal can produce the absolute cheapest compute on the planet because not only is the electricity from the Himalayan rivers naturally abundant,
But the cooling is free.
exactly, the cooling is completely free.
Because you just bypass the air conditioning entirely. You use the ambient freezing temperatures of the high-altitude Himalayan environment to cool the server racks.
It's just a brilliant observation of macroeconomics colliding with physical geography. You're swapping expensive Texas HVAC systems for the natural climate of Mount Everest.
It's so smart on paper. But, and I have to push back a little here, I have to stop and look at the physical logistics.
Yeah.
Because we've seen a micro version of this with cryptocurrency miners, right?
Right.
Like moving to places like Iceland to use geothermal power and cold air.
Right, the crypto migration.
Exactly. But Bitcoin mining rigs are relatively simple. They're basically just glorified calculators. We are talking about 50,000 megawatts worth of highly sensitive, cutting-edge AI infrastructure. How do you physically maintain that on the side of a mountain?
That is the big question.
I mean, you need pristine clean room conditions for these servers. You need massive fiber optic trunk lines capable of carrying terabytes of data per second out of a landlocked, mountainous country. You need specialized technicians willing to live and work at extreme altitudes. The thermodynamics are perfect, but the physical construction sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it really does. The infrastructural undertaking is borderline incomprehensible.
Right.
I mean, you are talking about blasting through bedrock to build fortified, climate-controlled data centers. You have to lay thousands of miles of heavy-duty transmission lines and secure supply chains for the most expensive hardware on Earth. And you're doing all this through some of the most unforgiving terrain imaginable.
It's a monumental task.
It is. So the logic holds up beautifully, but the execution requires a scale of capital that just changes the entire conversation.
Which is exactly where the manifesto goes next. Right. The founder doesn't shy away from the cost. He states very clearly that harnessing this electricity and building the infrastructure requires $120 billion.
120 billion. And we really need to contextualize that number for the listener. Nepal's current gross domestic product is hovering around $50 billion.
Oh, wow. So the capital required to build Himalayan Compute is more than double the entire annual economic output of the nation it will be built in.
Exactly. You cannot raise that through traditional venture capital on Sand Hill Road.
No way.
And you cannot get a standard infrastructure loan from the World Bank for a speculative AI moonshot of that magnitude. It's just too big.
Right. So the founder pivots to this radically unconventional funding roadmap. And he targets the largest pools of liquid capital on the planet, which are the sovereign wealth funds of the Gulf countries.
Yes. And his approach to the Gulf states operates on two distinct frequencies. First, he deploys a deeply resonant moral argument.
Oh, this part was fascinating.
It really is. He reminds these sovereign funds that millions of Nepali migrant workers essentially built the modern infrastructure of the Gulf countries with their bare hands.
Yeah, I mean, South Asian labor has been the physical engine of Mideastern development for decades.
Exactly. So he is framing this as a historical debt. He's saying it is time for the wealth generated by that labor to flow back and build Nepal.
It's a heavy, undeniable truth of the global labor market. But he doesn't just rely on guilt, right? He immediately anchors that moral pitch to a hard-nosed, existential economic reality for the Gulf.
Right. He points out that the era of fossil fuel dominance is ending. oil will eventually run out or, it will be entirely priced out by global shifts towards solar and renewable energy?
So the pitch is essentially a survival strategy for these monarchies.
Precisely. If the sovereign wealth funds invest this $120 billion into Himalayan Compute, they are buying a foundational stake in the commodity that will define the next century.
Right. They're hedging against the obsolescence of oil by monopolizing the processing power of artificial intelligence. It guarantees their nations remain wealthy power brokers in a post-oil world.
It's a very compelling macroeconomic argument. But to actually reach that $120 billion zenith, the manifesto outlines this dizzying, highly structured stepladder of funding rounds.
Yeah, let's go through the stepladder.
So he plans a 100K round, a 1 million round, a 10 million round, a 100 million round, a 1 billion round, a 10 billion round, and finally the $100 billion round.
So he is charting a systematic exponential progression of valuation.
Yes.
Oh.
And this progression introduces a really fascinating piece of proprietary terminology from the source. The founder claims to have coined a new financial metric, the Solara.
Okay, Solara, like solar energy.
Sort of, but it's a play on startup valuation terms. So we are all familiar with the unicorn, right?
Right, the Silicon Valley shorthand for a privately held startup valued at $1 billion.
Exactly. Well, Bhagat defines a Solara as a startup valued at $1 trillion.
A trillion-dollar startup. I mean, just think about the macroeconomics of that for a second.
Yeah.
Only a handful of the most dominant publicly traded tech monopolies in human history companies like Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA have ever crossed the trillion-dollar threshold.
Right. It's an exclusive club.
But he is predicting that Himalayan Compute will hit a $1 trillion valuation in 10 years, and that the AI boom will create as many Solaras in the near future as there are unicorns today.
It's a staggering prediction,
Yeah.
and he justifies this monumental ambition by explicitly rejecting the cultural ethos of Silicon Valley.
Right. He uses this really interesting historical analogy. He compares the traditional tech startup model to Christopher Columbus.
Yes. He says Silicon Valley operates on a Columbus methodology. You set sail trying to find India, you stumble into America by accident, and then you pivot your business model to exploit the new discovery.
Right. It's that classic ethos of move fast, break things, and iterate.
Exactly. But you can iterate a software app on the fly. You cannot iterate a hydroelectric dam.
Exactly. You can't just pivot a concrete dam halfway through construction.
Precisely. So he argues this project is not Columbus, it is Apollo 11.
Going to the moon.
Yes. When you are building physical, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure in the mountains, you cannot launch a rocket and then ask mission control for directions halfway to the moon. The entire trajectory, the exact roadmap, must be calculated and locked in before ignition.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
But that roadmap relies on the Gulf states for the final stage, right?
Mm.
But the ignition, the base of that stepladder, that relies on a highly orchestrated microfunding strategy aimed at the Nepali diaspora in the United States.
Yes, he is tapping into grassroots wealth. He mentions reaching out to high-profile figures like Samar Maski.
Right, he's a top Nepali tech entrepreneur who listed his company, Fuse Machines, on the NASDAQ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the pitch to the elites is straightforward. Invest now, like Yahoo invested in Alibaba, and watch 1 million become 1 billion.
Right.
But the true innovation here is his pitch to the broader diaspora.
Yeah, this part was wild to me. He targets Nepali doctors, lawyers, and engineers in the U.S., and he asks for just 5 individuals to invest $20,000 each.
Right.
And the hook he uses is just mesmerizing. He promises that a $20,000 investment will transform into $20 million in 10 years. He explicitly states that $20 million is more money than any white-collar professional could hope to make over an entire career of full-time labor.
Right. He's basically offering a complete bypass of the traditional American dream.
Exactly. Like, why work for 40 years when you can just write a $20,000 check now?
And he pushes it even further down the economic ladder, creating a concept he calls the 5K millionaire.
The 5K millionaire.
Yeah. He argues that any Nepali immigrant in the U.S., regardless of their profession, can participate if they possess basic money management skills.
Which he defines simply as a hard instinct to save.
Right. If you have that instinct and you deploy $5,000 into this seed round, he claims it will yield $5 million in a decade.
Okay, this is where we hit a massive structural reality check, though. Because if you are promising 1,000x returns, you will easily find thousands of people willing to empty their savings accounts to hand you $5,000.
Oh, absolutely.
But U.S. securities law has a very strict mechanism to prevent unregulated companies from acting like mutual funds. The manifesto actually acknowledges a law stating that once a private company hits 70 investors, it is forced to go public.
Yes, and triggering an initial public offering at the seed stage would be catastrophic.
Right, because of the regulatory compliance costs, the SEC filings, the public audits, the loss of executive control. I mean, it would suffocate Himalayan Compute before a single server was ever even purchased.
Exactly. Going public is a mechanism for mature companies, not nascent infrastructure moonshots.
So how do you accept thousands of $5,000 checks without triggering the 70 investor limit?
Well, the founder proposes a legal workaround utilizing a separate holding company, which is essentially a special purpose vehicle or an SPV.
Ah, okay, so a workaround.
Yeah. Instead of individuals investing directly into Himalayan Compute, they pool their money into this distinct holding company. Then, the holding company acts as a single, unified investor on the capitalization table of Himalayan Compute.
Right, so it consolidates thousands of individuals into one single legal entity, neatly bypassing the threshold.
Exactly. But to fuel this holding company, he introduces another concept, the bundler.
The bundler, right?
Yeah. He admits he doesn't have the bandwidth to run a community-wide fundraising campaign himself. So he incentivizes the network. Anyone who rounds up their friends and family and raises at least $100,000 becomes an official bundler.
And what do they get for doing that?
Their reward is 10% of the money they raised, granted to them in shares.
You know, if you understand U.S. political machinery, this is identical to campaign finance bundling.
Yes, exactly.
Because a politician can only take a few $1,000s from a single donor. But if a highly connected individual, a bundler, gathers maximum donations from 50 wealthy friends and delivers them all at once, they gain massive political influence. The founder is applying the exact mechanics of political capital aggregation directly to venture capital.
It's a fascinating crossover, and the psychology of the pitch is so interesting because it blends visionary technological forecasting with returns that just defy the laws of traditional finance.
Oh, for sure. Promising a 1,000x return in 10 years on a heavy infrastructure project is virtually unheard of.
Right. I mean, software can scale infinitely with zero marginal cost, allowing for explosive returns. But physical data centers require concrete, steel, and continuous capital expenditure.
Right, you can't just copy-paste a dam, which raises the ultimate question of feasibility.
Absolutely.
Let's assume the holding company works. Let's assume the Gulf states actually write the $120 billion check. You now have the capital. But you are attempting to execute the most complex infrastructure project on Earth within a developing nation known for labyrinthine bureaucracy.
Yeah, the red tape.
How does a trillion-dollar company function day-to-day without being ground to dust by red tape?
Well, the founder is acutely aware of this friction. He explicitly acknowledges that the greatest threat to Himalayan Compute is not the technology, and it's not the fundraising. It is governance.
Governance.
Yes. So to solve this, he proposes a governance structure that fundamentally rewrites the relationship between a corporation and a sovereign state.
Okay, let's unpack that, because this part of the source material was mind-bending. He is offering a full 10% equity ownership of Himalayan Compute directly to the government of Nepal.
Right. Run the math on his projected Solara valuation.
Okay, so 10% of a $1 trillion company, that equals $100 billion.
Exactly. He is proposing the creation of a $100 billion sovereign wealth fund owned entirely by the state. He is offering to hand the government an asset worth twice as much as their entire current GDP.
But, and this is a massive but, the quid pro quo is absolute. In exchange for double their GDP, he demands what he calls a one-desk policy.
The one-desk policy.
Right. He wants a single desk physically located inside the Prime Minister's office. And this single desk will have the ultimate authority to handle every single bureaucratic need the company has. It cuts across all ministries, bypassing the federal legislature, the provincial governments, and the local municipalities entirely.
Yes, a complete bypass.
Wait, hold on. Let's really look at the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
He wants to hand a sovereign government $100 billion in equity in exchange for a single desk that overrides the entire democratic bureaucracy.
It's radical.
It's not just radical. It's not a standard business negotiation. That is essentially a soft corporate integration into the executive branch.
Yeah.
And just to be clear to you listening, we are just looking at the mechanics of his proposal here.
Yeah.
We're not endorsing this kind of corporate state integration. We're just exploring how he envisions this functioning.
Of course. And from an analytical perspective, it creates a fully symbiotic corporate state. By embedding the company's regulatory processing inside the highest executive office, and by making the state's financial future entirely dependent on the company's valuation, you eliminate friction through sheer financial gravity.
Right, because the government cannot afford to let local zoning laws or provincial tax disputes slow down their golden goose. The corporation bypasses the bureaucracy because it has effectively purchased immunity through aligned incentives.
Exactly. It is breathtaking in its audacity.
It really is. And he balances this corporate centralization with a massive philanthropic arm, too.
Right? The second 10%.
Yes. He allocates a second 10% equity block to a dedicated foundation. And the sole mandate of this foundation is to permanently eradicate poverty in Nepal.
And the mechanism he chooses for this eradication is highly specific. The foundation will not build schools, it will not fund agricultural training, and it will not build hospitals.
So what did it do?
It will execute massive direct cash transfers to the poorest 20% of the Nepalese population.
Just straight cash.
Just straight cash. And to achieve this logistical feat, he points to the Aadhaar UPI framework.
Okay, so for those unfamiliar with South Asian digital public infrastructure, this is a reference to the India stack, right?
Yep.
Which is arguably one of the most successful technological deployments in modern history.
Absolutely.
Aadhaar is India's biometric identification system, giving over 1 billion people a unique digital identity based on their fingerprints and iris scans. And UPI is the Unified Payments Interface, which allows instant, zero-cost money transfers directly between bank accounts via mobile phones.
Right. By linking biometric identity directly to a digital bank account, a government, or in this case a foundation, can bypass the entire NGO sector, bypass corrupt local officials, and instantly beam cash directly into the pockets of the poorest citizens.
It's a system of direct benefit transfers that basically eliminates leakage.
Exactly.
And the philosophy driving this choice is stated with absolute, unapologetic clarity. I want to read this quote directly from the source. The founder writes, "Poverty is a lack of cash. You end poverty by doling out cash. Prosperity people need to work for."
It's a very stark worldview.
It really is.
All right.
I want to pause and dissect that definition for a second. Poverty is a lack of cash. It strips away every sociological argument about systemic inequality or generational trauma or lack of educational infrastructure. It treats poverty strictly as a mathematical deficit on a ledger.
It does.
But let's look at the macroeconomic reality of this cure, right? If you take $100 billion worth of equity, liquidate it, and pump it into an economy that currently only produces $50 billion worth of goods and services, what actually happens?
That's the big fear, inflation.
Right. If everyone suddenly has their bank accounts flooded with cash, but the domestic supply chains, the farmers, the factories, the transport networks, haven't magically doubled their output, doesn't that just trigger massive hyperinflation? The cost of a bag of rice or a sheet of tin roofing just skyrockets because there is too much money chasing the exact same amount of goods.
You are describing the classic inflationary trap of universal basic income applied without corresponding supply-side growth. In resource economies, it's often referred to as Dutch disease. A massive influx of wealth destroys the domestic pricing equilibrium.
Exactly.
But the founder's implicit counter-argument relies on the secondary effects of the Himalayan Compute project itself. The theory is that the $120 billion physical construction of the data centers, the roads, and the power grids will rapidly industrialize the nation.
So the cash transfers are meant to basically keep the poorest citizens afloat while the broader economy scales up its productive capacity to absorb that new wealth.
Exactly. It's a bridge.
Wow. It is a high-wire economic experiment on a scale rarely seen outside of post-war reconstruction. It's just wild to think about. And, to understand how someone arrives at a vision, this grand mixing, bleeding-edge AI infrastructure, trillion-dollar financial engineering, and literal nation-state restructuring, we really have to look closely at the mind of the architect.
Yes. The manifesto provides a very deep dive into Paramendra Kumar Bhagat's personal history, revealing a life deeply intertwined with political maneuvering and technological shifts across 2 continents.
Right, because his political roots in Nepal are extensive. He details his involvement in the massive democracy movements of 2005 and 2006.
And this was a pivotal moment in Nepalese history, resulting in the dismantling of a centuries-old absolute monarchy and the birth of a federal republic.
Right, and he claims that out of the 200,000 Nepalists living in the United States at that time, he was the only individual working full-time to advocate for this democratic transition from abroad.
He traces his political organizing back even further, noting that before he was even old enough to run for office, he served as the Vice General Secretary of the Nepal Samajwadi Janata Dal, which was a breakaway faction of the Sadhavana Party.
And the most crucial aspect of this history is the network it produced, right?
Oh, absolutely. The network is everything. He lists his former activist peers and their subsequent ascensions to power. He worked alongside Rameshwar Yadav, Hridayesh Tripathi, and Sarita Giri, all of whom became powerful government ministers.
Wow.
He specifically points out Rajendra Mahato, noting that Mahato was a junior to him in the party structure, but eventually rose to become the deputy prime minister of Nepal.
So he is establishing an undeniable pedigree here. When he proposes a one-desk policy and a $100 billion equity transfer with the government, he isn't just some foreign tech bro cold calling a bureaucracy.
Not at all.
He is a former vice general secretary proposing a deal to the very ministries run by his former colleagues and juniors. The political gravity of that network is immense.
It really changes how you view the feasibility of the one-desk policy. He also highlights a specific current political connection that serves as the catalyst for the entire project.
Right. He mentions his cousin.
Yes, his cousin, Balin Shah, noting their shared lineage through their grandparents. Now, Balin Shah is a massive figure in contemporary Nepalese politics, and the founder describes him as the most promising political figure to have emerged in Nepal in my lifetime.
And Bhagat explicitly states that the emergence of leaders like Balin provides the necessary hope for good governance. Without that specific political foundation, the entire economic revolution collapses.
Exactly. And again, just to be completely clear to the listener, we are impartially exploring these fascinating claims of political involvement across two continents. We're not validating the political figures themselves, we're just analyzing the text.
Right, absolutely. We're just tracing the history he laid out.
Yeah.
And his American timeline is equally dense with political and technological milestones. After arriving in the U.S. for college, he claims that within 6 months, he was elected student body president at a top liberal arts college in the American South.
Right. And he contextualizes this achievement by pointing out that he won this election nearly a decade before Bobby Jindal gained political prominence in the South. He adds the socio-political observation that the region is, quote, still considered not particularly friendly to non-whites, framing his victory as an early, profound shattering of political ceilings.
And he carried that ambition into the national political machinery, too. During the intense 2008 Democratic primaries, he claims to have been Barack Obama's very first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Operating as an Obama loyalist inside the absolute stronghold of the Clinton political machine.
Yeah, a place he calls the capital city of the world. And he claims he paid a steep political price for his early alignment.
Right. And parallel to this political organizing, he was absorbing the brutal lessons of the early tech industry. He reveals that he was part of a team attempting to build an online South Asian community roughly half a decade before Facebook even launched.
Wait, really? Half a decade before Facebook?
Yes, but they were wiped out. The company did not survive the catastrophic dot-com bust of the early 2000s.
Wow. So when you synthesize all of these data points, a highly specific psychological profile really emerges. You are looking at a founder who survived the dot-com crash, fought in the trenches of the 2008 Obama campaign, and played a role in the democratic restructuring of his home country.
Yes. He views himself as an active participant in history, someone who has repeatedly identified massive societal shifts before they became obvious to the mainstream.
It makes you wonder, from a purely analytical perspective, how much of a startup's valuation is driven by the cold, hard math of its business model, and how much is driven by the sheer reality distortion field generated by a founder's personal mythology. When you are asking for $120 billion, investors are betting on the psychology of the architect just as much as they are betting on the megawatts.
That's a great point. A founder with this specific scar tissue, who has navigated systemic political overhauls and survived early market collapses, signals to sovereign wealth funds that they possess the aggressive strategic mindset required to build a corporate empire in a challenging geopolitical environment.
Right. The narrative of historic destiny is basically a tool used to convince massive institutions to attempt the impossible.
Exactly. And attempting the impossible is exactly what this manifesto outlines.
It really is. We have spent this time deconstructing a vision that attempts to fuse the raw, freezing physical geography of the Himalayas with the abstract, insatiable demand for artificial intelligence processing power.
It is a blueprint for a $120 billion infrastructural engine, fueled by the grassroots micro-investments of the diaspora and the massive post-oil capital reserves of the Gulf states.
And all of it managed through an unprecedented symbiosis between a trillion-dollar corporation and a sovereign government designed to eradicate poverty through sheer digital velocity.
Right. It proposes leapfrogging the traditional industrial revolution entirely. Why build sweatshops or low-tier manufacturing when you can use your natural geography to become the indispensable backbone of the global AI economy?
Exactly. Which leaves us with a final, massive geopolitical question for you to consider. The founder believes this specific pathway is possible only now because the physical demands of AI have fundamentally changed the rules of the global economy. As artificial intelligence requires exponentially more electricity and, crucially, exponentially more physical cooling, are we on the precipice of a massive shift in global power?
It's the multi-trillion-dollar question.
It really is. Will nations with historically challenging freezing climates and abundant natural energy suddenly find themselves holding the most valuable real estate on Earth? If data and compute are the oil of the 21st century, are the freezing peaks of the Himalayas destined to become the new Middle East?
It's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible intellectual journey. Keep diving deep.